She had to do this with her dog every day, until this happened. Chapter 1. The routine. It began like any other day for Sarah. She slid out of bed, stretching her arms above her head as the first rays of the sun filtered through the curtains. The clock on her bedside table blinked at her, 6:15 a.m. She sighed. The early mornings were part of her life now, a rhythm as regular as her heartbeat. But this wasn't about her job or a morning workout. It was about Duke, her dog, a massive, shaggy Newfoundland who demanded a certain routine, a routine Sarah both loved and resented. Every morning, she would stumble out of bed, throw on an old hoodie and jeans, and clip on Duke's leash for their morning walk. At first, it had been a joy, those early walks in the crisp morning air, just her and Duke, the world still waking up around them. But over the years, it had become more of a necessity than a pleasure, something she had to do, like brushing her teeth or paying bills. Duke was a good dog, loyal and gentle, but he was high maintenance. His thick fur required constant grooming, and his size made him a challenge to manage at times. And then there were his moods, times when he would just stop mid-walk, staring off into the distance as if seeing something Sarah couldn't. "I swear, you're like a stubborn old man," she would mutter, tugging at the leash. Duke would glance back at her with his deep brown eyes, unblinking, as if to say, "You'll wait for me, won't you?" And she always did. The walk took them through the same path every morning, a quiet park near their house. The place was usually deserted at this hour, save for a few joggers or dog walkers who nodded politely as they passed. Sarah liked the quiet, but sometimes it felt like a prison, trapping her in a loop of repetition. Every day was the same, until it wasn't. Chapter 2. A change in the air. It started subtly. One morning, Duke seemed more restless than usual, his massive paws dragging on the pavement as they set off. His head whipped around at the slightest sound, his ears perked up, and he would sniff the air as if searching for something. "What's gotten into you today, buddy?" Sarah asked, giving him a gentle pat on his head. But Duke just kept moving, his pace quickening as they entered the park. It was as though something was pulling him, some invisible force Sarah couldn't see. They followed their usual route, past the old oak tree, around the pond, and up the small hill that overlooked the park, but Duke wasn't slowing down like he normally would. He pulled at the leash, something Sarah hadn't seen him do in years. She frowned. "What is it, Duke?" And then she heard it, a soft rustling in the bushes near the hilltop. Duke stopped dead in his tracks, his body tensing. His nose pointed toward the noise, his eyes alert. "Probably a squirrel," she muttered, tugging on his leash again. "Come on, let's go." But Duke wouldn't budge. His entire body was still, as if waiting for something. Sarah's unease grew as the rustling intensified. And then, suddenly, a figure emerged from the bushes. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered gray coat, her hair wild and unkempt. Her eyes were wide, panicked, darting around as if she were lost. "Hello," Sarah called out cautiously. The woman's head snapped in her direction, her eyes locking onto Sarah's as if she hadn't noticed her standing there. "Oh, thank God," the woman whispered, stumbling forward. "Please, you have to help me." Chapter 3. The plea. The woman's name was Alice, and as Sarah helped her sit on the park bench near the hill, the story spilled out of her in fragments. She had been running for hours, hiding from someone dangerous. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she spoke. "I don't know who he is," Alice said, her voice shaky. "But he's been following me for days. I thought I could lose him in the city, but he found me again last night. I ran here hoping to hide." Sarah glanced around the empty park, her heart racing. "Did you call the police?" Alice shook her head violently. "They won't believe me. I tried. He's not normal. She broke off, glancing around again, her eyes wide with fear. "He's not human." Sarah's skin prickled at the strange statement. "Not human? What do you mean?" Before Alice could answer, Duke growled, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through the air. His eyes were fixed on something in the distance, and when Sarah followed his gaze, her breath caught in her throat. A man stood at the edge of the park, his silhouette framed by the rising sun. He was too far away for Sarah to make out his features, but something about him sent a chill down her spine. He didn't move, didn't even seem to blink, just stood there, watching. Alice grabbed Sarah's arm, her fingers digging into her skin. "That's him." Chapter 4. The chase. The moment Alice spoke, the man began to walk toward them, slow, deliberate steps that made Sarah's heart pound in her chest. Duke was growling louder now, his hackles raised, pulling at the leash as if ready to charge. "We need to go," Alice whispered, her voice barely audible. Without thinking, Sarah yanked on Duke's leash and turned to run, Alice stumbling beside her. They raced through the park, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the quiet morning. Sarah's mind was spinning, adrenaline surging through her veins. Who was this man, and why did Duke seem so determined to protect them from him? They didn't stop until they reached the street on the other side of the park, ducking into a small alleyway to catch their breath. Sarah glanced back, expecting to see the man following them, but the park was empty. He was gone. "I don't understand," Sarah panted, turning to Alice. "Who is he? What does he want?" Alice shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know. I've been running from him for weeks, but he always finds me. It's like he can sense me." "Sense you," Sarah repeated, confused. But before Alice could explain, Duke began to growl again. This time, it wasn't a warning, it was a low, rumbling sound that came from deep within him, as if he sensed something terrible approaching. Sarah's heart sank. Whatever was happening, they weren't safe. And Duke knew it. Chapter 5. The Revelation. For the next few days, Alice stayed with Sarah. There was no question about it, she couldn't let Alice fend for herself, not with that man, or whatever he was, out there. Sarah had called the police, of course, but Alice was right. They didn't take her seriously, not when she mentioned the part about him not being human. In the safety of Sarah's home, Alice opened up more, revealing pieces of a story that sounded too strange to be real. She spoke of dreams she had been having long before the man started following her, dreams of a dark, endless forest where she wandered alone. And in those dreams, the man would appear, watching her from the shadows. "He's been in my mind for months," Alice whispered one evening as they sat in Sarah's kitchen. "And then one day, I woke up and he was real. He was there, standing outside my apartment. Since then, I've been running." Sarah didn't know what to make of it. Was Alice delusional, paranoid, or was there something darker at play here, something that defied explanation? But Duke believed her. Every time Alice spoke about the man, Duke would growl, his eyes fixed on the door, as if waiting for the threat to come bursting through. And then, one night, it did. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. It was around 3 a.m. when Sarah was jolted awake by the sound of Duke barking. Not just barking, howling, a sound so full of fury and fear that it sent chills down her spine. She leapt out of bed and rushed to the living room, where Alice had been sleeping on the couch. The front door was wide open, the cold night air swirling inside. Duke was standing in the doorway, his body tense, teeth bared. And in the darkness beyond the door, Sarah saw him, the man. He stood at the edge of the yard, his face still hidden in shadow. But there was something different about him now, something in the way he moved, as if he wasn't quite solid. He seemed to flicker in and out of existence, his form shifting like smoke. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the air around her growing colder, thicker, as if the world itself was warping in his presence. Duke took a step forward, his growl deepening. Sarah could see the fur along his back standing on end, his muscles coiled and ready to spring. And then, without warning, the man lunged. Chapter 7. The Choice. It happened so fast. One moment the man was standing at the edge of the yard, the next he was in front of Duke, his hand reaching out toward the dog with impossible speed. But Duke was faster.